Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into an absolutely brilliant story called The Skin Artist. It's one of those tales that completely strips away the shiny veneer of technological progress to ask a really uncomfortable question about human connection, art, and the literal skin we live in. We're going to explore a future that feels, honestly, unsettlingly close to our own, and chart the journey of two incredible characters who use pain, ink, and wood to map their way back to reality. Let's get into it.
Imagine for a second never having a physically awkward, uncomfortable, or painful interaction ever again. Sounds like a literal utopia, right? Well, in the world of the skin artist, humanity has actually managed to pull this off. They've synthesized and optimized the physical sensation of touch. But this brings up the exact cost of our obsession with perfectly curated, simulated connection. The story brilliantly asks, if you remove all the friction from human contact, do you accidentally just remove the humanity too?
Setting the stage, let's jump into part one, the neural age.
So picture this. In this neural age, everyday human touch has been completely replaced by consumer haptic suits. We're talking a perfectly optimized, entirely sterile simulation. But then you have our protagonist, Mara Voss. Mara runs a permanent body workshop, basically a traditional tattoo parlor. And the contrast here is just wild. Outside her door, a frictionless, painless digital simulation. Inside, she's literally grinding her own pigments on a reclaimed oak table that has absorbed years of human sweat. She creates intentional, painful, beautiful wounds. She's providing the one single thing the haptic net can't, a permanent, undeniable physical reality. Now, because there are millions of these haptic interfaces running simultaneously everywhere, the entire city hums at this subsonic frequency. The author perfectly describes this ambient resonance as an architectural tinnitus of the nervous system. It's like a low-grade, society-wide grief. People walk around feeling this melancholy they can't quite put their finger on. And I think that just perfectly captures what we lose when touch goes from being a profound, unpredictable human exchange to just a packet of transmissible data. And right in the middle of all this data-driven noise, Mara has marked roughly 4,000 human bodies. 4,000. And get this, she doesn't use the digital projection mapping that the rest of her industry relies on. She works entirely freehand. When people walk into her shop, they aren't looking for some quick cosmetic decoration. They're desperately looking to make a mark that says, I was here, this specific grief or this joy happened to me in the real physical world. Which brings us to the tragedy of Daniel. Daniel was a luthier, a true master craftsman who built stringed instruments purely by feeling the exact resonant stiffness of wood right under his fingertips. But a transit pod haptic malfunction sent this massive feedback loop into his nervous system. Now, he's left with only 12% of his standard tactile resolution. Just think about that. His hands are still strong, his motor functions are totally fine, but his world is completely numb. He's trapped behind this thick, muffled wall of nerve damage. Moving right along to part two, the artist and the luthier. So Daniel finally steps into Mara's shop, and what's fascinating is he isn't looking to be fixed. He knows his nerves are dead. He just wants a reminder that real, tangible touch still exists outside of some satellite data bounce. But Mara? She refuses to just start buzzing away with a tattoo machine. That's not her style. Instead, she puts him through this deliberate, totally anti-tech preparation over 3 distinct sessions. First, she just reads his skin with her bare hands, figuring out that his body has actually concentrated its remaining sensitivity right at his inner wrists. Next, she has him just hold a tattoo needle, just to prove to him that his muscular memory, the posture of an artisan holding a tool, is still perfectly intact. And finally, she sits down and talks honestly with him about the emotional weight of pain, preparing him for the smeared, muffled sensation he's about to feel. Let's look closer at this process in part 3, reading the territory. Okay, so Mara quickly realizes she isn't just making art here. She is literally building a functional map. To really get why, we have to talk about proprioception. That's your body's blind awareness of itself, how you know where your hand is even with your eyes closed. Because Daniel's tactile data is so smeared, his arm feels abstract to him, like the idea of an arm. But his proprioception, that's actually completely intact. So Mara realizes that if she creates heavily raised permanent ink on his skin, those physical marks will act as a phenomenological address. They'll give his intact proprioceptive sense fixed landmarks so he can finally triangulate his location in his own body. It's brilliant, really. Through these embossed marks, Mara is designing a brand new interface for his damaged system. No, she isn't fixing his nerves, but she is making his skin legible to the 12% of sensation he does have left. And as that ink gets laid down, Daniel begins to feel this profound shift. He transitions from being just a detached tenant, someone simply driving a numb vehicle around from the outside, to experiencing true phenomenological resonance. He is, quite literally, moving back into his own physical form.
Which leads us perfectly to part 4, a grammar of skin.
As they keep working, Mara's designs naturally start to mimic Daniel's hidden internal architecture, the veins, the tendons, the musculature. She's tracing the grammar of optimal flow through constraint, essentially making his invisible nervous system visible on the outside. And this unfolds geographically, over months. It starts at the wrist, the thinnest, most honest skin where the pulse lives. Then it travels up the forearm, branching out like a river delta to perfectly trace his vascular systems. Eventually, it reaches the elbow, the complex mechanical hinge of the body. And while it isn't completely finished in the text, Mara sketches out a future path that will ultimately sweep across his chest, ending right at the ribs protecting his heart. There's this incredible moment when the needle finally reaches his elbow, and Daniel realizes the distinct functions of these different body parts. He beautifully notes that the continuous, quiet lines on his wrist function as the base text of his new map, but that complex, highly vulnerable hinge of his elbow, specifically the funny bone, acts as the dramatic punctuation. It's the one place where the body just offers itself up with absolutely zero armor, and Mara marks it specifically to honor that extreme vulnerability. And then Daniel points out something truly mind-blowing. Looking at these branching, resonant lines on his arm, he realizes they look exactly like the internal bracing of a stringed instrument. The bass bars and sound posts you never actually see, but that exist purely to manage the flow of vibration. It proves that the grammar of physical structure is a universal language. Whether we're talking about a wooden vial or a human nervous system, the architecture of resonance is exactly the same.
Bringing it all together, let's head into part 5, the sound of limitation. So because of this new anatomical anchoring, Daniel is finally able to return to his workshop and tackle his unfinished 17th century bass viol. But he obviously can't build it the way he used to. He can't feel the microflexibility of the wood anymore. Instead, he has to rely entirely on cold, hard, unfeeling measuring calipers. He confesses to Mara that working this way feels like speaking a foreign language, like he has the right syntax but totally the wrong accent. But Mara gives him the best advice. She just tells him to accept it. She says, "The accent is yours now. The instrument will carry it." And he does. He actually finishes the viol. When a master musician finally comes to the shop to play it, what happens next is pure magic. Because Daniel had to build this instrument through a totally constrained process, relying on calipers instead of frictionless tactile intuition, the thicknesses of the wood were slightly altered, and this birthed a strangely dark, transparent, and completely original sound. The musician is absolutely stunned, realizing that a perfectly unconstrained maker could never, ever have built an instrument with this specific, profound voice.
The big takeaway here is absolutely huge. Whether it's the raw, painful ink of Mara's needle or the numb, caliper-measured limitations of Daniel's woodworking, the truth is undeniable. True resonance and genuine human connection do not come from a frictionless, optimized simulation. They actually thrive on friction. They thrive on the specific limitations, constraints, and wounds that make us human. The constraint produces something the unconstraint simply wouldn't.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to really ponder. As our own real world pushes further and further toward digital optimization and seamless, frictionless experiences, are you allowing yourself to feel the messy, unoptimized reality of your own existence? Are you just a tenant coasting through your life, or are you a resident? Think about that, and remember to embrace the friction. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.